Hello everybody, it's the first video of 2022, my first video of 2022, and I wanted to kick off this year by a review video. I haven't done a review video yet, so today we're reviewing my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, which is a truly awesome camera but with a horrible name. Just for a disclaimer, I am not going to try and sell you this camera, and simply I'm going to state my opinion about it and how I feel about it after using it for almost 2 years now. So I try to make your decision a little bit easier and try and figure out if this camera is right for you basically. But first, a quick video from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by nobody. Please sponsor me, somebody. I want to first talk about that the Pocket 4K is a 4-year-old camera now, and since then there have been other two cameras that came out, the 6K and the 6K Pro. Both were out when I first got my camera, so the reason I went with the 4K is because I wanted to shoot 4K RAW at the highest quality possible. So at the time, having the 6K and only shooting 6K RAW at the highest quality possible, it would result in a storage problem for me, and also my budget at the time was very limited. Also, the fact that the 4K can have micro four thirds lenses, which are very much affordable and you can find pretty much anywhere, I figured it was the right camera for me. Yes, having the amazing features of the 6K Pro like built-in NDs or better monitor screen is very much appreciated, and I would love to have them. I can do my work just fine without them. Now, since I want to be completely honest with you, and I'm not gonna sit here pretend that I don't have issues with this camera. One of the main issues I have is that if I want to use Canon EF lenses on it, I have to use a speed booster. And since there are two speed boosters in the market, one expensive and one very cheap, I have the very cheap one. It has problems. It has a rattling thing on the mount, which is not very stable. The touch to focus doesn't work. This is something you have to keep in mind if you're gonna buy a speed booster, and if you have the budget, go for the Metabones one. If you don't, the Viltrox one does its job just fine. It does what it's supposed to do, so this is something to keep in mind. If you want to use Canon only lenses, you might as well just go for the 6K versions. So now the second thing I want to talk about is the actual price versus the actual cost. Yeah, so 4K cost about $1,250, which is incredibly cheap, but for the most part, it will not cost you that. It will cost you way more because the camera needs a battery solution. So basically you have to get a cage which you can put rails on it, so you can put a V-mount or an MP adapter which you can put MP batteries on. Also, the camera, even though it has different types of recording options, CF, SD and SSD, you pretty much gonna be going with an SSD because it's the cheaper option and it's also fast. You can go SD cards if you want to keep your setup minimal, but fast SD cards, especially at raw speeds, are incredibly expensive. So that's why I went with an SSD, so that's why I bought a cage to put my SSD on. That's what probably most people do. If you're a gimbal guy and you want to have your setup as minimal as possible and put it on a gimbal, then I would probably suggest you go with another camera like a Sony a7S III or Canon R6, because those cameras form factor are like amazing for those things. Also, the autofocus on those cameras are like incredible. So if you're a gimbal guy and you shoot like events or weddings or pretty much that you need to be run and gunning most of the time, you might as well just go for a smaller form factor camera. I've never seen anybody hold a Pocket 4K like this, so that's also something you have to keep in mind. Moving on, I want to talk about Pocket's 4K biggest weaknesses and biggest strengths. Basically, the biggest strength is that you can shoot all these amazing codecs on it, a RAW, ProRes, LT, HQ, Proxy if you want to save up some space. The camera has a built-in mini XLR, which I think it records higher volume than a regular jack, which is pretty good actually. It has unlimited recording limit, so if you're shooting performances or theaters, this is something good. It has also a time code which you can use with external recorders. It has great dynamic range. The built-in preamps of the microphone are also one of the greatest about this camera. There's also 3 choices you can choose to record you. As I said earlier, there's an SSD, SD, and CF slot. You can also use built-in LUTs or import your custom ones to help expose your footage correctly. There's also the dual ISO, which is amazing sometimes, not all the time though. I will talk about it in a little bit. And generally great other features that make your all-around production experience much better for independent filmmakers. Also, let me talk about a little bit more about RAW and ProRes. Blackmagic RAW and ProRes are the best codecs I've ever worked with in a while. I'll actually ever, because the synergy between DaVinci Resolve editing and Blackmagic codec is amazing. If you're a DaVinci Resolve user editor, you know what I'm talking about. There is no stuttering, there's no render. You can pretty much drag and drop it anywhere and it will work flawlessly. It has made my editing life so much easier and so much more enjoyable. I have troubled in the past with Sony's or Canon's which shoots H.264 or H.265 codecs, and like my PC can barely handle them without proxy sometimes or rendering. Yes, if you have a not so powerful PC, you might have issues, but other than that, I have never had a problem with ProRes codec. Now, going into the weaknesses side, I'm not gonna sit here and talk about IBIS or EVF that the camera doesn't have. And if you care about those things, then maybe the Pocket 4K is not the right camera for you. I don't care about them, so if you do care about them, then it's something you should think about going into the other mirrorless cameras. I'm talking about the bad stuff, the actual build quality of the camera and how Blackmagic, the company, handles QA. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people devastated finding their cameras broken overnight. I'm talking about fungus in the sensor or inside the screen, which means the camera can be damaged if you're living in high humidity areas. HDMI ports frying because the camera doesn't regulate how much voltage to give when it's plugged in. Also, the USB-C port, some people have them broken in because it was yanked in. These are the many problems that people have to find the hard way. Unfortunately, these problems still exist on the newer models like 6K and 6K Pro. So if you want your HDMI cable or USB-C port intact, first of all, do not hot swap your HDMI cables while the camera is turned on. Turn it off, plug it in, and turn it back on. Also, if you want your USB-C intact, you can buy one of these angled adapters from SmallRig, which are God's work actually. Thank you, SmallRig. Please sponsor me, SmallRig. Now, dual ISO. I couldn't believe the wonders it did after I started using it. And if you want to learn more about dual native ISO, I suggest you go watch this video right here, the Filmmaker's IQ video. It's one of the best videos on YouTube about dual native ISO, and it will teach you 1 or 2 stuff about how to use it and when it's best to use it, and basically a scientific explanation behind it. However, sometimes I feel the dual native ISO wasn't enough. Especially, I was filming a theater performance once, and I wanted to put a telephoto lens on my camera, which, being a telephoto lens and vintage lens as well, it had like it wasn't very fast. It had like f4.5 or something. And the moment I put it on, it got everything dark. Combined with the theater's dark lighting, it was not very good actually. So I tried cranking it up to like 6,400 or something, and it wasn't that good. It started putting noise and stuff. So we ended up putting it out and putting the lens on an R6 Canon, which could go up to 8,000 ISO, which did the work for us, so that's good. So that's again another thing. If you do a lot of weddings, events, low light situations, which you like mostly dark, which you cannot have control over the lighting, then this is something you need to be taken into consideration. Okay, so another great thing about the camera is the UI and the menu system. It's so good, it's so intuitive to work with. You're one button away from shooting 24 or 60 FPS. You're one button away from switching between 4K and 2.7K ProRes or RAW. It's easy touchscreen accessibility to turn on certain features like zebras or switching ISO. It makes production so much faster and easier when you're on set, basically. An annoying factor of the DSLR video cameras is that they are photography cameras first and foremost. So if you want to find a setting, you have to go through menu and search for it deep manually and then turn it back on. For example, the GH5 or Canons or Sonys. So overall thoughts about the 4K is that it's a great tiny camera which helps you in productions. Although it's easier to compare it with other bigger cinema cameras like Arris or Sony Venice, it's still a tiny one compared to the big monsters like, as I said, Arri Alexa or even Red Komodos. The cinema camera industry and market is very expensive, and having a budget-friendly camera which helps you start your filmmaking journey is very much appreciated. I would never compare this camera to an Arri. I would compare it maybe with its cousins and competitors like Ursa Minis and C300s, but I would never compare it with a mirrorless or DSLR camera, because these cameras and those cameras are meant for different types of filmmakers, so you can't really compare them most of the time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you want. Maybe hit a like on this button. It helps with the algorithm of YouTube, obviously. You've heard this a lot, so like helps. If you want to see more finished work I've done with the Pocket 4K, you can visit my channel here on YouTube. There's plenty of videos you can watch. And if you think that I've missed something you wanted to hear, please ask me in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer you. Again, thank you for sticking up until the end. I appreciate you, and goodbye.